It's a mythological figure, half goat, half horse.
The woman by the goat, she's sawing something.
Yes, I think she's sewing the social body. The saw is a sign of division.
It's a good metaphor, I think, for our problems today. The social body being sawed apart.
Absolutely.
For me, this project began with the question, what is democracy? And I quickly realized it's not something that's ever actualized, but always something that is in motion, a kind of ideal we're reaching towards. But in practice, everywhere you look, democracy is in trouble. Progress can go into reverse, and terrible things have happened in the name of democracy.
Yes. It's being so abused and so misapplied, compared to its original meaning, which means the power of the people, the government of the people. But so many have fought for the realization of a true democracy, that in a way it's important not to abandon the word.
Right. And we also need to think hard about what that word even means.
Yes. Exactly.
In my mind, democracy does this remarkable thing by inviting all of us to come together and ask the Socratic question, how should we live? And yet, the most prominent ancient philosophers were profoundly skeptical of our ability to rule ourselves, right?
The fundamental question, I think, motivating the whole of ancient philosophy is the question of happiness. What is it that makes a life worth living? Okay, a good life. In Plato and Aristotle, the ground on which the answer to this question is built is a city. A good life is one guaranteed by a good city. Bad life is one people lead in a bad city. Now, what makes a good city good, and this is something that both Plato and Aristotle will say, is justice. A good city is a just city. But even before they try to define what justice is, I think they will both hold that justice is good because it ensures the unity of the city. For Plato, the basic factors which endanger the unity of the city are wealth and its counterpart, poverty. Plato says in the Republic, in Book 8, that rich people want to become richer. This is the desire that motivates them. So, in becoming richer, they will take from others. They will put the others in a situation of debt, and they will make the others increasingly poorer. So this will break the city into two cities. We'll have the city of the rich and the city of the poor. And one part of the city will stand against the other part of the city. And this will initiate civil war. What poor people will do eventually, they will follow any demagogue that will promise them to overthrow the rich. And this, for Plato, will eventually and inevitably lead to tyranny. He says that, the passage is from democracy to tyranny because of that. This is why, in the Republic, he wants the rulers to be absolutely indigent, having no property whatsoever. Because the rulers will rule the city not because of ambition or love of money or love of honors, but because the city has brought them up. So they will have a moral and political obligation towards the city. So you see, this might be something that would be relevant for us today, because we live in a shattered, dismembered society. And this society has been dismembered because of extreme economical inequality. And what we're faced with is the need to remember this dismembered society.
$10 t-shirts. Women for Trump t-shirts, $10. Get hats too.
This election will decide whether we are ruled by a corrupt political class or whether we are ruled by the people. We're going to be ruled by the people, folks.
Trump was probably the legal hand grenade that we could have thrown into the system. People voted for Trump for different reasons. Same people who voted for Obama in the Rust Belt voted for Trump. Believe it, and that's how it is. The Democratic Party left the poor, blue-collar, working man behind. You can't just forget about poor white people. You have to look out for them. Trump, like in Detroit, when he stood in front of the Ford Corporation and said, if you take these jobs to Mexico, I'm gonna put a tariff on it. That appealed.
We're Americans, and Donald Trump said, I'm gonna put Americans first. People have different opinions of immigration laws. If we don't have a border, we don't have a nation. If we don't have strong borders and it affects our economy, Americans do suffer. If America is better, then we can have more immigrants come in, and we can, they can make their lives better. It's not that we want to keep everyone out and that we don't want them to have opportunity. It's that we need to be able to be successful ourselves.
But when I hear people chanting build a wall, I don't hear a lot of welcoming to
illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm. So democracy, what does it mean to you?
When I think about something, the word that inspires me, it's not democracy. It's, the phrase the American dream and that ability to climb.
Of course, Plato was writing at a time that was very different from ours, but his challenge still holds.
Yeah, it's not that different, actually. I mean, you tell me when we...
Yeah, keep going,
no.
yeah.
Yeah, no, the fact that the founding texts of the Western philosophical tradition, Plato's Republic, provides the most powerful indictment of not just democratic practices, but the possibility of democracy. And he argues that every democratic experiment, every experiment in which those Sly Stone called everyday people attempt to govern themselves, will result in tyranny because there's too much unruly passion and pervasive ignorance among the demos, among everyday people. See, I come from a people, a black people, who have suffered in forms of being terrorized, traumatized, and stigmatized in the name of majority rule. So democracy cannot be simply majority rule. If it was majority rule, black folk could easily have remained enslaved to Jim Crow. It was not democratic processes. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was dictatorial. It was not democratic. See, Brown v. Board in 1954 for school integration came from a counter-majoritarian institution called the Supreme Court. It didn't come from the majority. If the majority of Americans were to vote in 1954 for school integration. It never was passed. What's fascinating about my own tradition, Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer and the others, the radical Democrats coming from the chocolate side of town, coming from beneath American democracy, coming from the enslaved and the Jim Crow and the Jane Crow, is that we still held on to notions of democracy, but they were democratic critiques of the truncated democratic practices in America. So we're still wrestling with Plato's challenge. Plato's challenge will never go away, will never go away, because the fascist possibilities of any democratic experiment are always there. I don't care which part of the world you're talking about.
So is this where the magic happens?
It's where the magic happens.
That's one of our members down there now. Say hello to him. That's Representative Michaud from Durham County. And he sits, show him where you sit, Representative Michaud. That's an actual House member. He's the longest serving House member too. He's been here 40 years. Anyone have a question you want to ask? It's a great opportunity to ask a member something.
What do you do in this building?
I sit right there, and every time a vote comes up, I vote. I help write laws, I help make laws to how you operate, how your school operates, how the state operates. And anything that happens, you can blame it on them, not me. This was the original legislative Black Caucus. This was the three of us, the first three in the 20th century. That's Barack in his younger days, and that's Crazy Jesse and me. And this is the only thing I've got with Martin and me. A lot of folks will say the Klan now dresses up in suits and vests, which is basically true. I look, for instance, at the Republican caucus in this body. It's all white. I mean, they don't have a black face in their Republican caucus. During slavery, you had perfect classism there. You had black folks who were slaves. Then you had the overseers, who were white, blue-collar folks. And then you had plantation owners. The thing there was the plantation owners kept the fear among the overseers that black folks were going to take over. So the overseers did their worst on the black folks to keep them from coming in and taking their jobs, and the white folks sitting up at the top, enjoying it all without any discomfort at all. I mean, the analogy to me is there. You got rich white folks sitting up there, middle class folks sitting here. You got, let me back up, I don't mean to be racist in any way. You got rich folks sitting up there, you got middle class folks sitting there, and you got the rest of us sitting down here. And those in the middle are told by those at the top, you better watch those at the bottom because they're coming after you, and we sitting up there making all the money. Martin had always told me, he said, Mickey, we talk about economics, we talk about civil rights, we talk about, he said, but you know, none of this can be done unless we have somebody in the seats of power where the laws are made. He said, politics is the way of life. We need economic power, he said, more desperately than any other group in American society. But in order to get that, we've got to become involved politically. He said, you do a good job. I said, Martin, you crazy. When I first got elected, we were coming out of that period of Jim Crow, when you had literacy laws involved, you had poll taxes involved, you had everything involved to keep black folks from voting. When I came into office, things were beginning to improve. And one of the things I took on was voting rights. And then we started opening up same-day registration, out-of-precinct voting, early voting, 16, 17-year-old registration, all of these things. Here again, politics played a role in it, and my name was on most of all of that stuff that was passed during that. Now it's being taken away.
This was the first election without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. From the White House to the Republican legislature, they keep telling the lie about voter fraud and not the truth about voter suppression. Since 2010, we've had 22 states that have passed voter suppression laws, where you've had the highest turnout of black and brown people. And on election day, there were 868 fewer polling places in states with histories of discrimination. And there were 158 less voting sites in the black communities in North Carolina. When people will cheat like that, standing down is not an option. But you also must hear me. This is not just about a president. We miss it if we think it is. This is about an entire web of money and influence and white hegemony that has been working to tie up the American democracy from the very inception of this country. And they've been working not from DC down, but from school boards and county commissioners and state legislatures up. That is why they fear a crowd like this. Even as the divide between the rich and the poor is the widest in our nation's history, our electorate is growing more diverse every year. And wealthy oligarchs know that they cannot hold on to power in truly democratic elections. So what we are witnessing is an all-out assault, foreign and domestic, on the very heart of our democracy.
When I was in Charlotte during the Charlotte uprising, we were in the street. I had tear gas all over my arms, all over my neck. And as we're trying to get safe and trying to slow down, a car just halts. And a guy, a white man, gets out of his car with a pistol. And he's just pointing it at all of the protesters. Like, at first he was silent and it was eerie because you don't know what he's gonna do. He ended up getting back into the car, but that moment and feeling like that type of violence for asking for the police to stop killing black people was it was a game changer for me in my mindset, that me asking for my human rights is offensive to a group of people in this country. And it's so offensive that they would take my life. And that me asking for my rights means that I get to be brutalized by the police. It means that I have to take medic training as a 19-year-old college student. I have to be able to protect myself against the state. And I just left my mom's house 2 years ago, right? Like, these are real things that are happening. And like, it's a lot.
What is your struggle compared to the previous generation? Like, how do you, in this world where we flatter ourselves and tell ourselves stories about the civil rights movement and pat ourselves on the back?
Yeah, I think my struggle is a little bit different than it was in the 60s and the 50s, because you're dealing with like the covert racism, and you're dealing with like institutional racism and mass incarceration. So we've still got the 60s issues, they're still there, but now the state and the capitalists have built all of these structures to keep us from getting in, and they've locked the door 50 times over. And we thought that getting the vote was the key. We thought that going to school with these people, we thought that that was the key. And we keep trying to figure out what these keys are, and it's not opening the door. It's not opening the door to liberation. Black folks still aren't free, and we keep trying and we keep trying. So like, what's next, right? Do we keep asking? Do we keep voting? Do we take what's ours? Like, what do we do? Democracy, it doesn't feel like this in my head. It doesn't feel like being scared for my life. It doesn't feel like knowing I'm gonna be in debt in 2 years. It doesn't feel like my family being incarcerated for having a little bit of marijuana. That's not what democracy feels like to me.
This is the Agora. Agora means I get together. This particular Agora, which is the Athenian Agora, actually denotes the beginning of democracy. This structure is a landmark of the Athenian democracy. Clisthenes, an aristocrat, in 508 BC made major reforms or introduced major reforms in the political life of Athens. And a lot of historians and everybody actually think that this is the birth moment of democracy. So that's why it's so important, okay? Would you like to hear what he did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's very complicated, but I adore this moment of the Greek, of Athenian life. Okay, now, what happens is that before that, just before Clisthenes introduced his reforms, there was a riot. I love this idea. There was a riot of the citizens, okay? You have a riot because it was a period of the Athenian life where people still had centers of power around wealthy aristocrats. Instead of that, Clisthenes tried to create another notion, the notion of belonging to your polis and not to the aristocratic family of your neighborhood, okay? And what he did is very, very interesting. Let's suppose that this is Athens and that this zone here represents the coast, this zone here represents the urban place, and this is the countryside, okay? So the idea of Clisthenes was to break down and abolish completely all the local centers of power, which were created around a powerful aristocrat and the clientele around him, okay? So you have to redesign the political space. He takes these zones and he mixes up everybody to create a new collectivity. It's completely arbitrary, but the new political space is now based on this new division. And you have people who never seen each other before, and they have to work together for a year. This is a new community, okay? It's a community of citizens, not a community of, oh, Astra is my friend and I love her very much and you're my friend too. And we will have our little interests and I'll support her and she will support me. No, you have to support somebody whom you never seen in your life and work together to support your polis. To be an Athenian means that you are over and above the individuals, okay? You are I'll have to find something more elegant, an elegant way to say it. Because this is so important, because that brings us to how we should change the way we think, and this is how I think things can progress in all sorts of areas in our lives. We need to change the way we think. We need to start thinking that we belong to other communities, other collectivities than the modern way of living brought us to believe.
Yo soy de Guatemala. Cuando yo escuché de que Estados Unidos hay dinero, hay cosas, entonces allí me gustaría venir aquí para seguir adelante, pues eso.
todos aquí somos indígenas. Mucha de nuestra gente está aquí porque vinieron huyendo de las guerras. Somos parte de una cooperativa, somos dueños de nuestro trabajo y no tenemos un supervisor.
I worked at a convenience store. The boss man was not that nice. He made me to work 15 hours. I would go in at 6 o'clock in the morning and get up at 10 at night, working like 15 hours and not getting paid for overtime. I was making like $6, $5 an hour.
Estamos creando trabajo, le estamos dando oportunidad a todas las personas que vengan. El año pasado fue que lo hicimos, que nos ha ido bien, que la cooperativa pudo tener ganancias, sostener el salario y tener ganancias. Se les dio un bono a las personas. Apenas llevo 2 meses que compré una casa.
Año llegué estuvo un presidente del Clinton, algo así. Entonces es lo que para mí es un orgulloso de que el presidente que están en los Estados Unidos porque se apoyan los inmigrantes. Cuando yo vine aquí me siento feliz. Eso es lo que yo siento.
¿Y ahora?
De ahora porque ahora es un poquito tristeza.
Trabajamos el día a día, pero nos incluyen con las otras personas, como dicen que son ladrones, son asesinos, violadores, y no solo somos nosotros, hay varios de nosotros iguales, varios hispanos, varios indocumentados, donde realmente nada más vienen a buscar un mejor futuro para su familia y pues ahora no sabemos lo que vaya a pasar con todos.
¿Cómo vamos a quedar aquí si nos separamos? Y mis hijos se lloran por esta situación también, porque cuando ellos se van en el bus y hay los niños, ustedes ya ganaron el presidente, ustedes ya se van a tu país. Pasa lo que pasa, yo creo que hay esperanza.
Let's begin with democracy, because I personally even wrestled a bit with making this the theme of the film. But I kept returning to democracy.
It's great.
Right? So
Great. So you're almost a metaphor for our problem, which
Right.
is, on the one hand, democracy is this totally fluid and stretchable notion today. It can be appropriated by anybody for anything. It has been appropriated for terrible purposes, for imperialism, for colonial conquest, for smashing unions, for undoing affirmative action. All kinds of things happen in the name of democracy that you might object to, that I might object to. And it has many possible forms. But then we think, okay, so just let's get away from it. Let's have something else. Let's go to a different form for understanding justice or for centering our own projects of freedom, equality, emancipation, just living, inclusion, and so forth, sustainability. And we keep coming back to it. And I think we keep coming back to it for a simple reason. It captures the idea of people governing themselves rather than being governed by something else. And the etymology of the term democratia simply gives you that in a nutshell. It's the people rule, and the alternative is we are ruled by a part, we are ruled by an aristocracy, we are ruled by a tyrant, we are ruled by an oligarchy, we are ruled by a technocracy, we're ruled by something other than ourselves. And what we see today, I think, is a strong temptation to just turn the whole business of governing over to technocrats, not just to corporations, not just to the wealthy, but to essentially human versions of algorithms, or algorithms themselves, as opposed to the interested, the passionate, the political, let alone the popular. And the idea is, there are just a few who really know, put them together in a room and let them run the world.
Yeah.
I find that terrifying. I think it is terrifying because it imagines that it has no political interests, but in fact it's totally shaped by a world that is now itself largely governed by finance. And so it has tremendous political interests.
And it's also not democratic because it's not self-rule. It's the rule by profit and loss, by external metrics.
Absolutely. It's not choosing and deliberating about who we want to be, what kind of people we want to be, what we want to become, how we want to conduct ourselves. It's simply living according to what you've just described, these very narrow norms of what is to be done, which is what enhances value, what depreciates value, what brand might succeed, what brand will fail you. It's a very narrow universe of thought and of conduct. And so you're absolutely right. It doesn't have self-governance in it, either in the individual or in the collective sense.
In the 13th century, in Siena and surrounding areas, a banking system emerged. So what this town represents is really the beginning. It's the first elements of a capitalist society. In 1287, there was a revolt in Siena. They gave power to an oligarchy of merchants and bankers. This is the room where they used to meet. And then around 1330, they commissioned the painting of this room. And what we're looking at is the allegory of good government and bad government. Good government on the central wall, and on the right side we have the effects of good government, and on the left side we have the effects of bad governments. This painting is supposed to celebrate their government and to, legitimize it as a just government, as a government that is capable of guaranteeing the prosperity of the town, and is a government that takes into account the interest of all. Mm-hmm. That's, of course, is the claim.
So it's propaganda for the oligarchs.
That's their image of themselves. The central character is a very patriarchal figure. He represents the common good, and the good government sits among virtues. Peace, we have fortitude, we have justice. Temperance must know the limit, right? So, for example, you're not supposed to flaunt your wealth because you can provoke here envy, and envy generates discord. And here's tyranny, right? Tyranny is the concentration of power. Tyranny is privilege, is abuse, is injustice.
Even in this painting from so long ago, can we see modern day tyranny?
Yes, there's a connection. It's the greed, the absence of a awareness and acceptance of a limit. Yeah. It's the beginning of a long historical process where the rule of money has extended itself to every corner of the world.
I have been trying to distill this into one question. And the question is, Who rules?
Who rules? Well, if we see democracy as the rule of the people, certainly it's not the rule of the people. We have deified the market, as if it is some entity unto itself. We have given up power, basically, as societies, as citizens. We have undermined our own democracy by saying we give the power to who? To the markets. When I was elected in 2009, I had to deal with a crisis where we had a deficit of 16%, a debt that had doubled. So I had a choice. Either we go bankrupt, or we decide to ask for loans from our partners in the European Union and the IMF.
And we have very important challenges ahead of us. Amongst them, of course, are the decisions we are making in Greece. We are committed to make the major changes.
Markets were pounding us, and we were pressured by our lenders to make massive cuts.
Δούλεψα 38 χρόνια στην οικοδομή, έπαιρνα 704 και από αυτά τόλμησανε και με έκοψαν τα 15. Και από τα 704, άρα πώς να μείνει στο δρόμο. Δεν τους χαρίζω ούτε μισό σέντς που λένε.
Εγώ παίρνω 350 ευρώ και πώς να ζήσω με αυτά με 350 ευρώ. Έχασα το σύζυγο και δεν έχω φράγκο τώρα, με αυτά ζω. Πώς να ζήσω.
Να κάνουμε.
Standing up to the markets would have been great, but in a small country like Greece, I mean, we don't have that power to be able to withstand these huge forces.
Und wenn man diese Verpflichtungen nicht erfüllt oder wenn man, um es salopp zu sagen, längere Zeit über seine Möglichkeiten oder über seine Verhältnisse lebt, dann zahlt man dafür einen Preis, den einem niemand ersparen kann. Und deswegen besteht europäische Solidarität derzeit darin, Griechenland klarzumachen, es führt für Griechenland kein Weg daran vorbei, Fehlverhalten der Vergangenheit nachhaltig zu korrigieren.
The narrative has been that Greeks have been living beyond their means, that they have overspent public money, and now it's time to pay the bill. This is a lie. The creditors pretend to lend money to Greece, but this money never comes to the Greek state. Actually, 92% of the money supposedly given to Greece is going back to the creditors. They even like to call this a bailout program, pretending that they save the Greek society while they're really saving themselves and their banks.
Είμαστε το κίνημα των πλατιών. Δεν μπορεί να εκτονωθεί ένα κίνημα που έχει διαμηνήσει ότι ήρθαμε εδώ για να πάρουμε τις ζωές μας στα χέρια μας. Οι πρώτες 40 μέρες ήταν μόνο η αρχή, δεν θα φύγουμε αν δεν φύγουν.
Yes, Mama.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
One thing we've been wanting to talk to people about is how the economic crisis is affecting your generation.
I'm 23, so from 2008, where the global economic crisis started, I was 16. For me, all the most important stuff was the occupation of the squares in 2011. Every day there was a public assembly, and it was for me a great experiment on direct democracy. People from all kinds of different backgrounds came and they discussed and they self-organized in very impressive numbers. Everyone thought that there was time for change. And Syriza was a political result of that.
Η ετυμηγορία του ελληνικού λαού κλείνει
με τρόπο αδιαμφισβήτητο τον φαύλο κύκλο της λιτότητας στην πατρίδα μας. Η ετυμηγορία του ελληνικού λαού, η δική σας ετυμηγορία, ακυρώνει σήμερα με τρόπο αδιαμφισβήτητο τα μνημόνια της λιτότητας και της καταστροφής.
We thought that a party that owed its loyalty to the people would be an instrument to voice the interests of the people. And we thought that after all these years of fighting, that we achieved that in a way. And we were so naive.
Ελληνίδες Έλληνες, μετά από 5 μήνες σκληρής διαπραγμάτευσης, ζητήθηκε από την ελληνική κυβέρνηση να αποδεχτεί μια πρόταση που συσσωρεύει νέα δυσβάστακτα βάρη στον ελληνικό λαό. Πριν από λίγο συγκάλεσα το Υπουργικό Συμβούλιο, στο οποίο εισηγήθηκα την διοργάνωση δημοψηφίσματος, προκειμένου ο ελληνικός λαός κυρίαρχα να αποφασίσει.
The referendum was a historical moment for the Greek people. The people were given a say for their lives, for their dignity, for their future, for their destiny.
Ό,τι και να ξημερώσει τη Δευτέρα, είμαστε ήδη νικητές. Σήμερα γιορτάζει η δημοκρατία. Η δημοκρατία είναι γιορτή. Η δημοκρατία είναι χαρά. Και σήμερα γιορτάζουμε τη νίκη της δημοκρατίας.
The people were far more courageous than their leadership. And they, by a 62% vote, said no to the blackmails addressed to them. This was a sovereign democratic decision that nobody had the right to violate. And yet, 8 days later, the country's creditors and the country's government reached a so-called agreement to implement the very measures that had been rejected by the people. What happened was a betrayal.
Δεν έχουμε δικαίωμα το όχι του λαού να το κάνουμε ναι με την ψήφο μας. Αυτό συνιστά πραξικόπημα, κατάλυση της δημοκρατίας, κατάλυση της συνταγματικής λειτουργίας και επιβολή συνθηκών ζωής υπολογισμένων να επιφέρουν εν μέρει ή εν όλο την καταστροφή μέρους ή ολόκληρου του ελληνικού πληθυσμού.
It's very important for societies to realize that it's time to fight against this kind of new tyranny, which is attacking the people and democracy through economic and banking means.
Έχουμε παιδιά.
Ναι, 2 αγόρια.
Φυσιολογική το γιατί.
Όχι, καισαρική και τα 2.
Αυτό το ιατρείο είναι ένα από τα πολλά ιατρεία που λειτουργούν αυτή τη στιγμή στην ευρύτερη περιφέρεια της Αττικής. Όπως και σε όλη την Ελλάδα, σαν μια προσπάθεια απάντησης των γειτονιών, του ελληνικού λαού, οργανώσεων και συλλογικοτήτων στα αποτελέσματα της τεράστιας κοινωνικο-οικονομικής κρίσης που πλήττει τη χώρα από το 2009. Η φτώχεια αρρωσταίνει τους ανθρώπους. Η ανεργία, η επισφάλεια, η αίσθηση κοινωνικής αδικίας, το να μην τρέφεται κανείς καλά, να μην ζει στις καλύτερες συνθήκες, όλα αυτά προφανώς αρρωσταίνουν τους ανθρώπους.
Αν δεν υπήρχαν κοινωνικά ιατρεία σαν αυτό εδώ, της Νέας Φιλαδέλφειας με τους εθελοντές κτλ., τι νομίζετε ότι θα είχε, ποια θα ήταν η κατάσταση, πώς θα ήταν?
Και πιστεύω ότι θα χανόντουσαν πάρα πολλές και περισσότερες ζωές από ό,τι χάνονται. Αυτό πιστεύω ότι θα γινόταν.
Τα φάρμακα μας τα φέρνουν διάφοροι εθελοντές. Ό,τι έχει στο σπίτι του φάρμακα να μην τα πετάει, όλα είναι χρήσιμα. Και ανοιγμένα φάρμακα που μπορεί αυτό εδώ να έχει βγάλει μια καρτέλα, τα υπόλοιπα είναι καλά. Οι ασθενείς δεν μπορούν να αγοράσουν φάρμακα, αλλά ούτε και εμείς, γιατί είμαστε όλοι εθελοντές εδώ. Οι περισσότεροι είμαστε και άνεργοι.
Συνελεύσεις γίνονται κάθε Τρίτη και είμαστε όλοι μαζί, και γιατροί και οι υπόλοιποι εθελοντές. Δεν υπάρχει ούτε πυραμίδα, ούτε αρχηγοί, ούτε τίποτα.
Δηλαδή, εδώ μέσα μπαίνουν κάποιοι άνθρωποι, εξυπηρετούνται και δεν έχουν καμία σκέψη το τι είναι πίσω από αυτό, ποιο είναι το όραμα, το γιατί στήθηκε αυτό το πράγμα.
Δεν είναι το δύσκολο κομμάτι. Αυτό είναι λεπτομέρεια.
Ναι, τώρα και με το κίνημα που βρίσκεται και πόσο εύκολα συνειδητοποιείται ο άλλος. Δεν γίνεται από τη μια μέρα στην άλλη.
Εμένα γενικότερα τα προβλήματά μου όσον αφορά τα κοινωνικά γιατρία δεν είναι το που συμμετέχω, που δεν συμμετέχω. Έτσι, είναι αυτό το πιο ζωτικό θέμα. Ότι κάνουμε κάτι για να βοηθήσουμε τον κόσμο, απλά πράγματα. Έτσι. Χωρίς όμως να πάμε να αντικαταστήσουμε τις δομές υγείας.
Θα είστε το νέο σύστημα υγείας?
Δεν θέλουμε να είμαστε το νέο σύστημα υγείας. Εμείς θέλουμε να φτιαχτεί ένα δημόσιο δωρεάν και υψηλής ποιότητας σύστημα υγείας, τέτοιο το οποίο να εξυπηρετεί τις ανάγκες του πληθυσμού και εμείς να πάψουμε να υπάρχουμε ως ιατρία. Δεν θέλουμε. Δεν θέλουμε να κάνουμε τη δουλειά καλύτερα από ό,τι κάνει το κράτος. Θέλουμε να πιέσουμε το κράτος να κάνει τη δουλειά του.
Προτείνουμε τώρα από εδώ και πέρα και παρακάτω. Πώς πάμε παρακάτω όλο αυτό.
It's been a struggle to live here in Denmark and also know how many things are going on back home and how much people are suffering and if I would be needed there to help. All of my classmates are leaving. Almost no one is staying. We need to have a chance of a decent life. It's very difficult for me to leave Greece. And that's, I think, a big ethical dilemma for me, that if not us, then who will change the thing? Are you crying?
Yes, of course I'm crying.
Hello, Mama. I hope politically that one day I will be able to come back, that the political situation will better and the European situation will better, so I will be able to come back and help the place that I know so much about and I love so much about and I have pained so much for.
These are the men of power in the town. Now, all these men are men of money, are men of property. They are the ones who inhabit those beautiful houses with the big towers. You try to build your tower as tall as possible as a manifestation of your prosperity and your power. In a sense, the tower was really an expression, a phallic symbol of power. Exactly. This is a moment in which power is very physically accessible. It's still embodied in local structures that are very accessible, to the citizen. And in that sense, it's possible to imagine to overthrow it. Those exploiters or those men of power are within the reach. They are within the wall of the city. You can think of overthrowing. You can organize of yourself to overthrow them. This is something that has changed immensely. Today, you don't even see money. The physicality of money is beginning to disappear. When people had the bag of coins, they carried the bag of coin, but today money is running around the globe at the speed of light. Those seeds of capitalism that we see here has now fully blossomed. And so it has become much more difficult, in fact, to think of a democratization that starts from the local level. Because the global today is so much enmeshed into the local.
Yeah, I love this idea too of right, power is less visible today. If we can't identify it, we also have a harder time resisting it.
Power appears as an abstract system.
I want to ask you about Rousseau. He's this pivotal philosopher. In a way, he's the first modern defender of democracy.
Yes. For Rousseau, the meaning of democracy and the meaning of freedom is self-governance, self-legislation. It's not what often is called now negative freedom, liberty, or freedom from the state and freedom from each other. It's freedom with one another to set the terms of our existence. And Rousseau's a pretty lone voice in the history of modern democratic theory in pushing that point about freedom being collective self-determination as opposed to the right to be let alone. And yet, Rousseau understands also that to culture democracy, to nourish democracy, you have to have a people oriented toward the desire to govern themselves. And that moderns, especially because of what he calls commercial society or commerce, what we would call capitalism, are much more inclined to be kind of self-interested and self-involved. So you actually have to produce through education, through culture, through what he calls civic religion, the orientation toward governing ourselves in common and the willingness to be governed in common, to submit to what the common determines as what we should do, how we should live, what our laws should be. So he runs up against the problem that the thing he thinks will make us free, which is governing ourselves in common, is also not something that's just automatically there in our natures. It has to be cultivated, it has to be cultured, it has to be brought about by the very laws and by the very form that he's trying to get us to respect and to honor, but that won't be produced out of human beings who don't necessarily incline in that direction. So that's what we call Rousseau's paradox. How do you make democracy out of an undemocratic people? That's our problem today.
Do you live in a democracy?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you live in a democracy?
Democracy, doesn't that mean that they tell you what to do? Like democracy.
Do you live in a democracy?
Yes.
Do you trust the government?
No.
Do you vote?
No. No, I do not. And I'll never vote, ever.
If there's one issue you think is undermining our democracy, what is it? It can be anything.
Great question. What issue? Immigration.
I feel like we have a very, like for instance, if your parents make a certain amount of money, you're not going to get help from the government. But if you're below a certain amount and like you're a different race, you're gonna get help. Versus if you're a person that's lived here your whole life and you're white, and I'm not trying to be racist because I'm not, if you are a different nationality, you're going to get help. Versus as somebody who has grown up here, who's lived here, who has, worked since they were 16, and your parents make above the fast for amount of money,
150,000.
we're not going to get money. And I think that that's bullcrap.
Well, I haven't been to Miami in a long time. Let me say that. The first time I came to, well, I won't talk about the first time I came to Miami. I was running from the FBI the first time I came. We have to abolish rather than fix the system. The system cannot be fixed. I always like to go back to W.E.B. Du Bois and his notion of abolition. Because so many of the problems we're confronting are a direct consequence of the fact that slavery was never fully abolished. Du Bois argued that the abolition of slavery would not simply be the dismantling of the institution, but rather the creation of new conditions, new institutions, a new democracy. Because what he argued was that the democracy that we were all familiar with could not be the same if former slaves began to participate on a basis of equality. It would have to be a very different democracy, not the democracy of the founding white fathers. And so that was the challenge of the end of the 19th century. It was the challenge of the 20th century, and it remains the challenge of the 21st century.
Come on in, come on in. Yeah. How are you? Oh, good to see you. So good to see you. Very well, very well. Oh, anywhere you want to sit? Anywhere, yeah. This is your house. All right, all right. How's it going?
I believe in real democracy, but I believe in the democracy of the people, not in what we would call bourgeois democracy or the democracy of the ruling class, because they definitely have democracy amongst themselves, even though we're not allowed to participate in that. We're given the illusion that we can participate in it, but we're not allowed to participate in it. And that's why we are sometimes confused about what democracy is, because we're on the outside looking in.
What is democracy? Yes. But that question to me is like, it defeats the purpose of asking it, because we know what it is. We know what they claim for it to be. Black people have been the experiment of democracy. We have been at the expense of this so-called democracy. So what is democracy good for us? It's never been good for us. There's never been a democracy, to me, in my mind. So if that's the case, it's kind of like, fuck it. It's not even, why are we having this conversation?
If we are going to struggle to make a better world, a more democratic world, we all first must agree that all lives has equal values. Once we all agree on that, I think we can definitely stretch the concept of democracy. To me, I just see another period, historical moment that we're in, where we can either leap to get it forward, or we can go back.
I think it's really important when talking about democracy, especially in Miami, being a global city full of immigrants, who gets to be like a citizen, right? And who gets this global citizenship, and who's able to be mobile, and what's able to be mobile. Zygmunt Bauman said that like mobility in late modernity is a lot more important than capital. And I think we can see it in a lot of cases, right? My family came from Nicaragua with the funding of the Contra-terrorists and the overthrowing of the revolutionary Sandinista government. They came over here, they got papers, right? Which was a concession from Ronald Reagan. But a lot of the other Central Americans, El Salvador, Guatemala, they didn't get the papers, they get deported, they don't get citizenship, they don't get to participate. And it's really important to be like, who gets to count, who gets counted.
We're living in a place where there are people from Central America, from all over the Caribbean, from South America. There's all of these different people here, and I don't see any difference between a Jamaican being like, well, what do I need to learn about the Bahamians? A person from Nicaragua would be like, the fuck do I need to know about Black Americans? Or like a Black American can be like, the fuck do I need to know about Cubans, right? we're closing ourselves off to everyone else from the get-go. And if we don't stop doing that, we're not going to learn how to pick pieces of the puzzle up to put together something brand new.
There's some shards of glass, and he went to like 3 different hospitals in Turkey.
Why do you have to go to 3 different hospitals?
There's a lot of violence here in Miami. In fact, we have so much violence that the U.S. Army does come here for pre-deployment training as their medics prior to going off to Iraq or Afghanistan.
For many years now, in fact, they see more trauma here than they do on their deployment in a war zone. And that's, I think, become normalized. No one seems to blink their eyes at what sounds like a ridiculous fact.
And that is abnormal. I really believe trauma is a political disease. We have issues like, why is homicide the #1 cause of death for young African-American men?
Is it?
It is.
The problem is the despair that comes from poverty and the feeling like, I got nothing to lose.
If you have no way to support yourself, let alone your family, children that might be dependent on you for survival, if you have no way to support yourself, you're going to do anything you can.
It's not just the poverty here, it's the disparity. It's the extent of extreme richness right next to extreme poverty.
I jump on my bicycle every day on my way to work, and I'm going across the Venetian Causeway, which is where you see multi-million-dollar homes. It's beautiful. You know, palm trees, everything that you can stereotypically think about from Miami and South Beach and whatnot. 10 minutes later, you're in an area of the city like Overtown, which is extremely poor. And it's that extreme inequality, which has been linked directly to homicide rates, cardiovascular disease for both rich and poor people. When you have vast inequality, it's worse for everyone.
I remember when I was in elementary school, the janitor was an adult white man, right? But at the time, on the salary of a janitor, an adult white man could have a family, could have a vacation, could have a car. But now on the salary of a janitor, you hear so many times that they can't afford any of that, and they're on 1 inch away from homelessness. So something's changed in society, because when I remember his name, Mr. Novak. Mr. Novak was respected and could earn enough being a janitor, working 1 job, to have a family and have a life.
Yeah, that's a huge shift in our
And that's
economy.
changed.
Yes.
Well, that shift from the economy, I think, is not accidental. I mean, I
No.
think that's a result of the idea of democracy or a democratic government being co-opted by corporations and not the people, whether they're disenfranchised from poverty or lack of education or lack of access. So I think it is all tied together, that these state and federal government policies that are pushed by special interest groups or corporations or people who have a lot of money, I think it does trickle down and affect people's lives.
Here's where my commie friends are going off the rail. So capitalism works to keep things functioning until it gets out of balance. And I will agree, it's right now, it's out of balance. The money is concentrating too much at the very high end.
But we would say that's
It's
deliberate.
out of control. I don't think there's a Dr. Evil somewhere scheming to do it, but I'm actually very moderate. And so to both sides, I'll say, right? So to Tanya, I'll say, well, I understand you drive through this place where it's full of abject poverty, but I don't expect that you are going to keep coming to work every day and then what do you do with that? At the extreme, right? Just hand over all your money into a pool and let everybody who's not working share it. That's not going to work. And at the other extreme, we have the people who say, deny health care to everybody if they can't pay for it. I'm not supporting this with my taxes. Okay, fine. Well, I'd like you to take up arms and stand outside the hospital. And when they come up and they can't pay to come in, you go ahead and just shoot them, right? So, and they're not going to do that either. So there's these two extremes, and the proper answer is somewhere in the middle, and I don't know where it is.
If you could cure the social body, what would you do?
Spend more on education and less on guns and prisons.
Education.
Yeah, hands
From the
down.
very beginning.
Public education.
The idea of democracy is that the people rule. And so that's one thing I want to talk to you guys about is, how do you feel? Do you feel like you have a say in your school? Is that a place where you feel like you have any say over how things go?
I don't think we don't have a say because it's run by people bigger than us and bigger than the school. Like, it's a whole county, so I don't think we really have a say.
Whatever rules they establish, we just gotta follow. So, like, it's nothing else we could, like, say to defend ourselves. We just gotta do whatever they say.
Is democracy something you talk about in school and that you've learned about in your history classes and stuff?
Yeah.
That's less.
It's, like, about government, like different branches and, like that. They don't ask us, oh, so how do you feel about the school? How do you,
Does anybody ever think about school being another way? Like, could you imagine a school where the students actually had some sort of seat at the table and were allowed to have a vote or voice in things?
People inside the school should have something to say, but it's really not gonna matter. Because, like I said, there's other people ruling it. My voice not really gonna change nothing.
How about beyond your school? When you look at your parents, do you feel like they have a kind of say in the way things are going in the world or in the society, like more of a say than y'all?
I don't think people like of higher power really want to hear like a black mom that's poor, like in the ghetto. I don't think nobody really want to hear what she got to say.
It's like survival of the fittest, because if she speaks out and say whatever she got to say, they might just find somebody else better for the job that probably not gonna talk what they got to say, because it's plenty of people that probably want that same job she has. So it's better just to go out, do whatever you have to do, and get it over with.
If you could change something in the school, what would it be?
Well, we have good school lunch, but some days they just not really on it. Like, the food don't have no flavor or something like that, but if you come to the principal, he's like, food is food. Children in Africa don't get food, so you should just be grateful.
I know at one day they're gonna get tired at a point of us keep on asking them, can they warm up our food, that they just gonna say, how about we just make some better lunch or something?
What if the students got together and said, we're gonna all work together to try to get better lunch or warm lunch? That seems a really basic demand to me. They should at least be warm.
Like the get together part is, I mean, you have a right to do that, but if you try to go against them, they take away something we like. Like, we were able to use phones and stuff during lunchtime, but when we rebel against them or do something that we're not supposed to, that got taken away. So we still can't use our phones from the situation that happened. So they know that if we're afraid of something, that we're not gonna do one thing because they're gonna take away this.
Same over here. We said we wanted better lunch, and they took away the vending machines. School is supposed to be like your home away from home, where you just get an education. But I feel like if you keep taking away stuff from us, that's not right. Like, my mama won't take away like my lunch, be like, oh no, you can't eat. No, she won't do that. Like, she's gonna try to like find a way for me to like have a more and better environment. I feel like when you take away stuff from us, it's just like, why? Like, why are you doing this? Like, what point is taking away vending machines from children? Some kids don't even eat breakfast. So by that time, you 7:15 hit and you ain't eat breakfast and you say, oh no, we not serving breakfast. That's a whole day they not even think about school. They think about, oh, I'm hungry. Like, I'm starving. I'm not having a better environment. So I just feel like, why do you take it away? Try to make it better. If you hearing us say something about it, then you should be like, okay, that's a concern. We need to put that on our boards for the next meeting. Don't just try to push it under the rug and say, no, you're not gonna do this, I'm gonna take it away from you, and like try to like beat us. Like, I don't understand it.
Teachers and the principal don't really care about what our opinions and what we have to say, because at the end of the day, they're still gonna get their check. That's their favorite word or line.
At the end of the day, whatever you do, I'm still getting paid. So it don't matter if you get an F or an A.
Do they say that to y'all?
Yeah, the people at OIC say it.
I don't get it. Like, you say you go this and you do that, and we need to strive to be like you, but you don't like your job. You don't like what you do for a living. And what you say to us all the time is, go to college so you can do what you love, but you don't even love what you do.
I learned to cut hair in prison.
it was like something that I used to use to like get out of my cell, man. And I would tell the guards like, oh, I'm going to the shop to cut, and then I would just be cutting for like all day and all night. And then I just started loving it. Like it started out as a hobby, then it became just something like talking to dudes and getting to know people, and met some interesting people inside. I did 9 years. I was at a camp, they had a meat plant. I worked in the meat plant. We would be packaging the stuff that they would use in the public schools.
Like, did they pay you for that, or did they force you to do it, or how's that work?
Well, you get paid. You get paid what they call incentive wage. It's like 40 cents a day. It's embarrassing, actually. It's crazy, man. The things that they subjugate us to. I was at one camp where they put you, when they take you to ISO, they put you in a collar. You gotta get on your knees and submit to the cuffs. The officer says submit to the cuffs. Yeah, it's ridiculous, man. The biggest thing when I came home is the psychological effects of being in the cage for so long and then coming and being able to like be around women unrestricted. That was a huge thing for me. I was like my first girlfriend, which we broke up, but she was like, it's okay to touch me and stuff. Like I was like scared, like is it okay? Because for so long, I've been told, I guess I'm not good enough or like not worthy enough of human contact, things like this. So that's what's missing, man, is trying to get guys like me to actually adjust and acclimate to society, not comfortably, because everybody wants to hate us. They don't want us to be comfortable. Not comfortably, but like so that we can survive. You know, because yes, we messed up, but now that we're home, can we like get a place to live and a job? Like you're gonna do a background check on my place to live and my job and say I can't live or work? Like what? Because I messed up like 10 years ago?
And you also can't vote, right?
And then I can't even like do anything to try to change it. You're right, man. I don't know, I feel like it's just greed, corruption just taking over the whole thing, man. There was a story, they do this huge investigation, and turns out that the head of the SEC that's investigating the Chase Bank Corporation, they were frat buddies with the CEO. I'm literally reading this. I'm like, I can't believe, how is it that this guy was actually allowed to prosecute like his own, like, it's amazing to me. And wouldn't you believe it, the guy got off. Could you believe that, you know? So I guess that's democracy, right? When the judge walks down and gives you a hug and says, all right, you ready to go to trial? I guess that's democracy. I think that democracy is inherently flawed because people have to act it out. And like Machiavelli said, man is a sorry breed. They're selfish and greedy, and they're like parasites. So now you're gonna have like 10 people get in a room and try to decide things, but their egos are flaring, and now some law has been created, right? No telling what politician paid so-and-so to press the green button, because it's all about just getting these people to press buttons to agree on how they're gonna control the populace. And then I'm sitting in a cage, looking at it. What are you gonna do about it? You're gonna fight. And you got guys that fight the system, and they fight them with their own, fight fire with fire. Those hunger strikes in prison. Like I was in a hunger strike, but it was only for 6 months. It wasn't one of the big 18-month ones. And that'll be initiated, like we'll pass notes and we'll get everything together. And then we just won't go to trial. They'll try to wake us up. We won't go. The big thing that we were fighting for, which is gonna seem kind of lame, is they were trying to take the library, man. This lady came and she told us that no one can go to school anymore. Yeah. She came in and she basically was like, y'all don't deserve to get an education. So we stood up and fight. It used to be, I know for my heritage, it used to be illegal for us to read. So I don't know if they're trying to go back to this or what they're trying to do, like reverse all of this progress and things, but it's just no telling what type of laws are gonna pay. It used to be illegal to read. I can't believe this. So like, maybe they're trying to do it again.
Every democratic experiment we know has been shot through with structures of domination. Athens was a slave-based democracy. The United States, slave-based democracy. The legacy of white supremacy was first manifest with Europeans vis-a-vis indigenous peoples, the dispossession of their land, the violation of their bodies, their rights, their dignity, their self-respect. The second original sin was slavery, which would serve as not just the land base, but the economic base for what would become a highly limited, precious, but highly limited democratic experiment. Anti-imperialist at its beginning, 13 colonies revolting against the British Empire, the largest empire of its day. And then the question will be, well, given these revolutionary beginnings, the anti-imperialist struggles against the British Empire, that's going to send off some real signs of freedom struggle. Other folk gonna pick up on this. The enslaved people will, the workers will, the women will, the gay brothers, the lesbian sisters, the transgender folk, the bisexual folk, all will pick up on this. Lo and behold, this is a human affair. But what does it mean? It means from the very beginning, it's a global affair. There's something very powerful about that, because it means in all of these arbitrary boundaries, all of these lines of demarcation, these walls that separate, are shattered. And therefore, our democratic movement is one that embraces our brothers and sisters in Greece, in North Carolina, in Guatemala, in Ethiopia, in Tel Aviv, in Gaza, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Newtown, Connecticut, in Southside Chicago, and indigenous peoples' reservations. All of those precious folk have exactly the same value. And that's a very different way of looking at the world.
We have the Christian virtues flying in the sky on top of the common good. We have faith, we have hope, we have charity. One of the things that you notice is the absence of the principle of freedom. Freedom and equality are not important ideals in the Middle Ages. Actually, the concept of liberty and freedom in the modern sense, which is self-government, is a concept that has developed in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, more and more in contact with the European explorer and conquistadores, with the population of the Americas, in which entire communities had no ruler and they also had no private property. And so the notion of freedom as it is used by people like Rousseau, the capacity for self-government, which is our conception, or at least is the best conception of freedom. It's really something that we owe to the indigenous population of the Americas. In fact, out of these tales, out of these narratives about the so-called New World, are beginning to form the image of an alternative, another possible society, in which not only you free yourself from tyranny, but you also have the possibility of self-rule.
But here in this painting, the oligarchs are saying that they represent what's best for everybody.
Yes, exactly. But in reality, behind this ideal of harmony, there's a lot of hidden struggle. And it's the struggle for power between the big merchants and bankers and the local producer, the guilds, who are actually continuously fighting to enter the government. So it's very interesting where democracy is here.
This is the image of justice being served, and we're
She has a
saying,
head on her lap. It's quite weird. Here, it's an image of repression because we have a body of guards hovering over a group of prisoners, tightly tied and in very wretched condition. So we are asking, who are these prisoners? What kind of crimes, are they being condemned? And condemned to death, because on the extreme left side, we also see a decapitation. So we ask, who is this man? Why is being decapitated? Were they condemned for political crime? Were they perhaps rebels from some attempted revolts?
you've created a new reading of the painting because they're giving the image. Here's a picture of good government, harmony and peace flows.
Yes.
I feel as though suddenly you've turned it on its head, because what if these are not criminals but
Yes.
protesters?
Exactly.
The true Democrats who are trying to force him to be good. But what the whole thing is, what counts as a crime is always political.
It's always political.
After the revolt of the people led to this new idea of citizenship, Athenians had to rule themselves.
That's right.
So how did they choose public officials and make sure they weren't corrupt?
First of all, they are elected by lot. It's not that you vote for them, okay? Because that was thought to be very aristocratic to vote. Voting is very aristocratic to the minds of ancient Greeks. So you have to have a random selection of the citizens to run the business of the city. So you don't get elected by vote. You are selected by lot. It's a random sample of citizens because everybody has the capacity to run the business of the city. This is the original meaning of democracy, not the majority rule.
I think people's fear is, oh my God, if you randomly selected people by lot, the random guy on the subway could be the president.
Completely, yes. The prime minister could be somebody who would be a worker. So what? The worker perhaps knows better to run something than a prime minister who is always, sort of well protected in the system.
And only thinking about winning the next election.
Yeah, that's right. Democracy was not like a wild flower where the Athenians would go and cut it and have it as their political system. Nor is the case that there is the ideal form of democracy. No, they didn't find it somewhere else. They invented it. They created a new political system because that would ensure their well-being. Because you have to ensure the well-being of the people, okay? We forget that. We forget that.
انتم من اي منطقة من سوريا؟
أنا من حلب أيمن الأيامي. أنا تركت أهلي بسوريا ما بعرف عني شيء.
أو عندك حدا برا بدك توصلي له؟
أنا أخوي برا.
أخوك
بدي
وين؟
أوصل له بالنمسا.
بالنمسا. وإيش فكرة عندك عن الحرية؟
هلا الحرية إنه البني آدم ياخذ كل حقوقه مثل هالعالم اللي عم تاخذ حقوقها، مثل الشغل، الوظيفة، المعيشة، أحسن معيشة، يعني أسس عيلة. هاي الحرية. شو بدنا أكثر؟ إنه تتعلم، تتوظف، يصير لك راتب، لك عيلة، يصير عندك مسؤولية. هاي الحرية. شو بدنا أكثر من هيك؟ ما بدنا أكثر من هيك، بس بدنا إنه نحط راسنا على المخدة، لك على ما نكوبس، ما نخاف إنه هلا بدنا ننسرق، هلا بده يجي حدا يعتدي علينا، هلا بده يجي حدا شو بدنا نقول لك؟ من يومين صارت حادثة بمقدونيا لبنت عمرها 7 سنين اغتصبوها. هاي على الحدود. هاي شو ذنب البنات؟
وانت لو عندك قوة تحسني تحاربي مشان الحرية اللي انت بعقلك فيها، ايش كنت عملتها؟
بطلع هالعالم من هالكمات، بفتح الحدود، بخلي هالعالم تمرق كلياتها من دون استثناء. واللي شجعنا على السفر إصابة أمي. كنت جاي من المدرسة هون تعبانة، الدنيا شوب وما في كهرباء أبداً، لا كهرباء ولا مي. فأمي ضربت كوع، فما في بضربة الكوع هاي لسه ما تمددت، بتقوم تجي يلا الرصاصة دي كيفك وز طق، هيك كان صوتها. وأمي هون صارت إنه تتوجع كتير وتتزعفل، ما رفعتها هيك إلا الدم كله معبي إيداي. هون أنا دبيت الصوت، ما عاد فيني أتحمل. ما في إنه هي فاتت على العملية وهيك قعدت 6 ساعات تحت العملية. هون كلياتنا هسترنا وهيك، طلعت أمعاء مقطعة، أمولها المبيض وأمولها الكيلون، وقصوا لها 45 سنتي من الأمعاء ووصلوا لها هني. فهداك اليوم أنا ما بنساه، بكره سوريا لأجل هالموقف. يعني أنت تخيل أخوي عمره 3 سنين إنه يفقد أمي.
I was teaching English, but most of the time my students were not interested in my English, teaching English. They were interested telling stories, in my stories. Always they were coming to me, sir, tell us stories about life, stories about something. Then I was saying that you're coming for English, you learn English. No, sir, you give us a story. I really enjoy it. I was born in Afghanistan, but I grew up in Pakistan. It was so difficult to live in Pakistan because we are Hazara. They say they are Hazara, they are from Afghanistan, they don't have right to live here. Let's kill them. In front of my own eyes, I witnessed most of the people were killed. Then I was coming to my home. I was coming home. I was saying these stories to my mother. Then my mother, I didn't want to come here. My mother told me that you go. If you stay here, you will be killed.
What does democracy mean to you?
Democracy, in one word, to me is justice. Justice for everyone, and rule for everyone. justice. No matter I belong to rich family or poor family. But we don't have justice in our countries. The problem is that I was born in Afghanistan. And all the people who are born in poor countries, do they have any problem? Are they guilty?
It was interesting you said democracy is justice, because people often say democracy is freedom.
Freedom of what? Hurting somebody? Freedom of killing somebody? Freedom of what? This is also called freedom. I don't think so. People, ideas differ. Ideas are different. So in my opinion, I say no. Freedom of what? If we have justice, for example, we have rule. Justice means rule. Rule, if you have rule, this is the limit. If you cross this limit, you will be found guilty. You will be sentenced. You will go to prison. This is called. I need rule, justice, such things are called democracy. Democracy doesn't mean freedom for everything, I think. Don't mind, please.
Δεν υπάρχουν δουλειές για εμάς τους Έλληνες τώρα. Η κρίση είναι τόσα θέματα. Οπότε και οι πρόσφυγες θα εγκλωβιστούν εδώ πέρα και δεν ξέρω τι μπορεί να γίνει. Γιατί οι στατιστικές δείχνουν ότι οι Έλληνες κάνουν 1 με 2 παιδιά το πολύ, ενώ αυτοί είναι ως κύριο λόγο μουσουλμάνοι, οι οποίοι κάνουν πάρα πολλά παιδιά. Δεν θα μου άρεσε να αλλοιωθεί η ελληνική ταυτότητα μέσα στην Ελλάδα.
About what Greekness do we speak? I mean, Greeks have been migrating and they have been refugees and have been going abroad to study, to work, to find a better life, to make a better life for themselves for decades, not even centuries now. So this Greekness that those people speak about hasn't been lost all those years. I don't think that 52,000 people are able even to change it, but most of all, they don't want to change it. They don't really care about the Greekness. There are people fleeing war and horrid conditions. They want a free life, a new life. They don't want to change anybody else.
Democracy makes this big, universal claim that everybody's included. But historically, there have always been people left out.
Yeah.
Can democracy ever live up to its promise?
Okay. So this actually brings us to a whole other issue we haven't talked about, which is a big controversy in thinking about democracy today. There are many people who think about democracy and want what they call global democracy or global citizenship. I'm skeptical. I think to have democracy, there has to be a we. You have to know who we the people are. Can't just be a kind of vague, universal thing. And I think it has to be bounded. Because in order to govern ourselves, we have to know who the we is, who's doing the governing, and we have to know who the ourselves are and what their bounds or limits are. For us to say we're going to engage in a democratic process, we have to decide who's in and who's out of that process. Democracy always has exclusions. They've almost always been premised on terrible forms of marking, stratifying, and naming who's human and who's not human, by gender, by race, today by the question of documentation, papers, and so forth. I'm not defending those, but I am defending the idea that democracy has to have bounds. It has to have a constitutive we.
The problem with that is that there are global structures. That's what TPP is, right? That's what the WTO is. So you have globalized capital. And so then what counters that but global democracy somehow?
Right. So this is the nightmare of our time, which is that the undemocratic forces and the anti-democratic forces are increasingly global, increasingly supranational, not just post-national, and democracy must have a grounded, spatialized domain. So then the question is it possible? Can we think this power problem? Is it possible to think about democracy and democratic contestation of global forces that does not match the scope and the sovereignty of those forces? And I think in the end, The only prospect for democracy is that it operate at those more local and bounded levels in order not just to contest, but to dismantle the globalized ones.
Στο λιμάνι έρχομαι σχεδόν τώρα που είναι μεγάλο το πρόβλημα με το προσφυγικό, σχεδόν έρχομαι κάθε μέρα. Έρχομαι επειδή ξέρω καλά τη γλώσσα, έχω καταγωγή από τη Συρία, είναι και οι δύο γονείς μου από εκεί. Με κάνει περήφανο το να έχω ταυτότητα από δύο χώρες, το να προέρχομαι από τη Συρία και να είμαι και Έλληνας. Είδαμε τους πρόσφυγες που φτάνουν σε κάποιες χώρες της Ευρώπης, όπως είναι η Δανία, η Νορβηγία ή και κάποιες άλλες χώρες, που τους παίρνουν τα χρυσαφικά, τους παίρνουν τα λεφτά, τους παίρνουν τα κινητά για να μπορέσουν με αυτά και καλά να τους βοηθήσουν και να τους εντάξουν. Και βλέπουμε την Ελλάδα αυτή τη στιγμή που περνάει την οικονομική κρίση και περνάει μία από τις μεγαλύτερες δυσκολίες από το Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο μέχρι σήμερα, από το Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο. Ο ελληνικός λαός από το ειστέρημά του και με στένος να βοηθάει τον κόσμο, να αφήνει λογαριασμούς και πράγματα απλήρωτα για να μπορέσει να βοηθήσει τους πρόσφυγες. Το μόνο καλό που έκανε η οικονομική κρίση είναι ότι μας έφερε πιο κοντά. Σταυρούλα, θες να της δώσω το ακορντεόν να κάνουμε λίγο πρόβα για να μην καθυστερήσουμε?
Ναι, να σου το πω.
Ναι. Α, οκ. Μόνο τα επιτυχία. Ανάποδα.
بشعر بالحزن لأني أنا مريت فيه فما بدي إني حدا تاني إنه يمر فيه يدوق اللي دقناه يدوق المرار كل شيء دقناه. لو أنا أمريكية ولا ألمانية ولا نمساوية ولا جنسيتي أي جنسية بقدر أروح وأجي وأتفتل وهيك. والله إحنا بشر يعني بني آدمين ما إننا بهايم ولا حيوانات. ليه ما تموا هيك يعاملونا؟
It seems to me that real democracy, if it's going to work, it demands a certain intellectual engagement and wrestling with ideas, deliberation. But do you think people want to rule themselves?
Well, it's a tough question. Dostoevsky raised the question, is it not the case that most people fear freedom? Is it not the case that most people would rather be followers of authority rather than authorize themselves? That's the Dostoevskian challenge. In that sense, Dostoevsky is like Plato. Plato's challenge to democracy. Dostoevsky's challenge to people who want to be free. How many people really want to be free? James Baldwin said, very few. The burden is too much. Tell me what to do. Dangle in my face the mysteries turning into magic and the authorities dictating how I ought to live my life. That's most people. That's Brother Karamazov, the classic of Dostoevsky, the last text of Dostoevsky. It's a very important challenge. I think that, again, like Plato and like Dostoevsky, we never provide a theoretical response that is persuasive, because there's always so much historical evidence that they're right. They got to point out ignorance, they got to point out unruly passion, they got to point out people being deferential to authority in a critical way, they got to point out narrow conceptions of piety where people have blind obedience to authority, be it church, mosque, synagogue, government, television shows, radio shows, or whatever. There's tons of evidence for that. That's what we're up against in human history. That's why democracy is always an over-against practice, an over-against phenomena. And therefore, there's a sense in which we look foolish. Anybody who goes against the dominant tendencies of human history, which are those of hatred and revenge and domination and oppression and subordination and domination, what a fool. And you say, yes, count me in the crowd of the holy fools.
It's a very beautiful, bustling town. We see economic activity, cultural activity, and also the everyday life. By the same token, there's a whole area of life that's missing. We don't see inside the house. We don't see aspects of reproduction that are very central, particularly the raising of the children. Reproduction is still not yet seen as a sphere of political relations. Yes. I think it's very important to bring to this a feminist perspective, because first of all, I think the women have a particular insight into democracy. Women have never been befriended by democratic government. On the contrary, they've always been excluded from them. And for example, in Greece, women were absolutely excluded from public life. And in fact, the only role was to produce children for the state. And I think it was the great political and theoretical revolution of the women's movement in the 70s to have said, the personal is political, and more important, the sphere of reproduction, the sphere where everyday life is reproduced, is a political sphere. This, I think, it was a theoretical revolution, that the sphere of the political is much broader than government and passes through the home, passes through our kitchen and our bedroom, passes through the community. The community is a center of social power.
The entire social world is political.
Yes.
Even our relationships in the bedroom are political.
Exactly. Democracy in the home, democracy in the country. In order to have full democracy, you have to democratize the sphere of reproductive relation. You cannot simply have changes of government. We have to begin the process of reclaiming control on all the activities that are most important for our existence. What are the areas that are crucial to ensure this capacity and possibility of self-rule?
So democracy, it's worth fighting for?
Democracy is worth fighting for, but we have to be sure about how we define it. Not from above, always from below.
that preachers can fight for living wages, and workers can say Black Lives Matter, and a white woman can stand with her black sister for voting rights, and a black man can stand for a woman's access to health care, and LGBTQ folk can stand for religious liberty, and straight people can stand up for gay people, and bisexual people, and transgender people, and queer people. And a Muslim imam can stand with an undocumented worker. That's why we march. This is about whether we as a people can reconstruct the heart of our democracy and shock it back to life.